Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to our channel, Pakistan Zindabad, the next world superpower.
It's great to be back.
Today, for episode 44, we are doing a truly monumental deep dive. We're going to be tracing the strategic mindset, the very thinking of a major global military power over nearly 80 years.
It's a huge topic. We're really looking at how their fundamental approach to war, to national security, has had to constantly evolve and adapt.
And it's been under just relentless pressure, right? Geopolitical pressure and now more and more technological pressure.
Absolutely. And our guide for this, the core material we're drawing from, is the acclaimed and really comprehensive work, The Generals of Pakistan, written by Mr Zaheer Ahmad Meer.
It's an incredible source that maps this whole evolution. So our mission today, for you, the listener, is not just to list a bunch of changes.
No, not at all.
We want to give you a clear segment-by-segment look at the critical turning points.
Yeah.
I want to get into the why, not just what weapon they bought, but why the entire doctrine, their whole way of thinking about security, had to shift.
We're looking for those aha moments, those points where you can see the strategic logic pivot on a dime because of some new reality they were facing.
And when you lay it all out, the trajectory is just fascinating. I mean, it's the story of a military that literally could not afford to stand still.
It really is. We start back in 1947 with this colonial inheritance, a very conventional British-style army based on infantry and armor.
Right.
Then we move through the trauma of 1971, which, as we'll see, forced a complete strategic overhaul, a move towards resilience.
And then things get even more complicated.
Well, then we get the influence of the Afghan conflicts, which introduced a whole new dimension of warfare. Then, of course, the big one, crossing the nuclear threshold in the late 80s.
And that changes everything.
Changes the entire game. And from there, we land right in the current era where the discussion is all about dedicated cyber defense and this idea of comprehensive, integrated statecraft.
It's a story of rapid, almost forced innovation. Every failure, every victory, every new piece of tech was immediately folded into a new way of thinking about conflict.
It had to be.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start right at the beginning, at the very roots of their conventional warfare doctrine.
Absolutely. So this foundational period, from 1947 to 1971, it really set the stage for everything that followed. The doctrine was, to put it simply, built on classic high-intensity land warfare.
A model they inherited directly from the British command structure that was leaving.
Directly, 100%. This meant the primary focus was on holding territory, on defending long front lines using large, very structured formations.
So when you say inherited from the British, what did that actually look like on the ground? It makes me picture a sort of European-style army you know, designed for the fields of France, suddenly dropped onto the terrain of South Asia.
That is a fantastic and very accurate way to picture it. The blueprint was all about defending these long, complex front lines, but, and this is the key, often with extremely limited resources.
They're very thin.
Very thin, across vast distances. The structure itself was undeniably infantry-centric. Your infantry formations were the absolute backbone of the army.
And they were supported by armored divisions.
Yes, supported by armored divisions that explicitly mirrored the British organizational hierarchy. So you had the same command structures, the same tactical playbooks, but this reliance on conventional mechanized maneuvers, it meant their logistics, their communication, their command and control were all standardized, which is good.
But maybe not very flexible.
Exactly. Not flexible for the unique challenges of a brand new state.
So on the one hand, they start with a solid, established system. You don't have to invent everything from scratch. But on the other, it's a system that maybe wasn't perfectly suited to the immediate geographic reality, or, as you said, the severe resource crunch they were facing from day one.
That's precisely the core challenge they faced. They were resource-constrained from the moment of independence, which forced them to make doctrinal adjustments almost immediately.
So what was the first big adjustment?
Well, one of the key features of this early planning was the immediate designation of air support as a critical, high-priority force multiplier.
A force multiplier, meaning something that gives you more bang for your buck.
Precisely. The leadership knew, they just knew, they would likely face a numerical disadvantage on the ground, especially in the critical plains of the Punjab.
The flattest, most open area for an attack.
The easiest invasion route. So the Air Force had to be trained and equipped to be the counterpunch, to offset those ground disadvantages. This made the coordination between air and ground forces just paramount right from the very beginning.
Okay, so let's ground this in the actual geography, because that must have defined every single tactical choice they made. The source, it highlights two main areas that really dominated their early strategic thinking.
It did, and geography dictated the engineering, really. First, you have the flat, often featureless terrain of the Punjab front. It's crisscrossed by major rivers.
Which are huge obstacles for an army.
Massive obstacles. This meant they had to develop explicit, highly technical river crossing strategies. And this is crucial. We're not just talking about soldiers wading across a stream.
No, this is for heavy equipment.
This is about the core of engineers having the capacity to rapidly build and deploy heavy-duty floating bridges, pontoon bridges, things that can support a 50-ton main battle tank and a constant stream of trucks with supplies, all potentially under enemy fire.
So a huge part of the doctrine wasn't just about the fight on the other side of the river. It was about the massive engineering challenge of getting your fighting force there in one piece and doing it fast.
Exactly right. Any offensive or defensive plan in that region hinged on your ability to move forces across those major waterways quickly and securely. It is one of the most technical, engineering-heavy parts of conventional war. If you fail to cross, or if the enemy secures the crossing first, your entire offensive could just collapse.
And the second major focus, the one that seemed to dominate the strategic imagination and, I assume, the budget, was Kashmir.
Yes, Kashmir was, from the very beginning, unequivocally designated as the decisive theater for any major conflict.
What does decisive theater mean in doctrinal terms?
It means that's where you believe the war will be won or lost. So your planning, your resource concentration, the positioning of your reserve forces, the specific training for mountain limited access warfare, it was all primarily oriented towards operations in that incredibly complex mountainous environment.
So all the focus was there.
Or, and this is the other side of the coin, focusing efforts there to deliberately draw enemy forces away from the more vulnerable open plains of the Punjab. This created a constant tension, this two-front problem of plains versus mountains, and it strained their resource allocation right from the start.
So we had this early doctrine, very reliant on conventional linear warfare, like holding a line. But given the resource issues and the geography you described, which seems to favor quick, localized fights over these big, broad front lines, why did this inherited British model end up being so problematic for them in the long run?
Well, it was problematic because linear warfare, which is all about rigidly holding every single inch of a fixed front line, it demands two things that the young state of Pakistan chronically lacked: massive, sustainable resources and perfect, uninterrupted supply chains.
And they had neither.
They had neither. The reliance on armor and huge infantry formations, while it was the standard way of thinking globally at the time, it locked them into a predictable style of fighting, a style that could be pretty easily countered by a larger, better resourced force.
And this framework is what defined their first major wars.
It did. And the 1971 conflict, well, that provided the brutal, undeniable proof that this doctrine, based too heavily on trying to launch an offense from a rigid front line, was just unsustainable. It couldn't hold up against a combination of complex external and internal pressures.
So the doctrine just wasn't nimble enough. It wasn't agile. It showed that they urgently needed to shift away from just copying old models and start building something for their own reality. Something based on deep national resilience.
And that realization, like shock to the system, sets us up perfectly for the second era. Because after the catastrophe of 1971, there was this massive strategic and psychological reckoning. It led to a decade-long shift, a pivot, focused almost entirely on building robust, long-term resilience.
This era, from 1971 to 1988, it really does feel like a major pivot point. The focus of the doctrine moves so decisively away from emphasizing an early offensive strike to what became formalized as strategic defense. And this wasn't just a military tweak, was it? It feels like a total psychological transformation for the whole country.
It was survival strategy that was then codified into doctrine. The trauma of the loss, the partition of the country, it necessitated a doctrine that was focused on one thing above all else: surviving the initial onslaught.
Not trying to win in the first round.
Exactly. Forgetting about striking first to achieve some political goal. The number one priority became ensuring the state could absorb a large, coordinated enemy attack, that first blow, without completely fracturing or losing critical territory right away. And that required a comprehensive and very expensive modernization effort.
And a central part of this was bringing in new operational concepts. You mentioned the move towards mechanized infantry. What exactly does that mean in this context, and why was it so critical for a strategy of defense?
Mechanized infantry is a game changer for speed and protection. So instead of your infantry marching on foot or, being moved around in soft-skinned
That you're
trucks,
very vulnerable.
extremely vulnerable, they now move in armored personnel carriers or APCs right alongside the tanks. This was a huge evolutionary step. It allowed for rapid movement across the battlefield, which is necessary if you need to plug a gap in your defense or launch a quick counterattack.
And more importantly, it protects the troops.
Vastly better protection for your ground troops against that initial artillery barrage or machine gun fire. It lets your forces move faster, reposition dynamically, and be less vulnerable. All of those are absolutely essential for an effective strategic defense.
And that focus on protection, on being able to absorb a punch, that leads directly to this concept of defensive depth.
Precisely. This is one of the most tangible physical changes to the doctrine in this era. A major priority became creating physical defensive depth around your most critical national assets.
What kind of assets are we talking about?
Major urban centers, industrial heartlands. The whole objective was to make sure that your essential economic and political nerve centers, cities like Lahore or Karachi, were not immediately vulnerable if an enemy force broke through the front line.
So, practically speaking, what does defensive depth actually look like on the ground? I mean, is it just digging more trenches farther back?
Oh, it's far more layered and sophisticated than just trenches. It involves pre-planned defensive lines, one after another. It's layered obstacles, both natural ones like rivers and man-made ones.
Like what?
Like pre-sighted kill zones for artillery, huge anti-tank ditches, minefields. It's about managing the terrain to deliberately slow down, delay, and channel an invading force into places where you can destroy them.
So you're dictating the fight.
You're trying to. The goal is to make the enemy fight for every single mile, to bleed their resources, to make them waste their momentum far, far away from their real objectives. And all that buys you crucial time. Time for full mobilization and maybe time for international diplomatic intervention to kick in.
The structural changes to make all this happen must have been huge. A complete and, as you said, expensive overhaul of their entire defense architecture.
It was. It required massive capital investment and a lot of reorganization. First, the existing armored divisions were strengthened and hardened. This meant upgrading their tanks, improving their maintenance facilities, and just increasing the amount of time they spent training for these new coordinated defensive maneuvers.
And what about the air?
Second, there was a complete reorganization and expansion of the air defense shield. They recognized that air superiority was absolutely vital to maintain that defensive depth on the ground. You had to prevent the enemy from just flying over your ground defenses and bypassing the whole fight.
And the most telling sign of a truly defensive strategy, the thing that shows you're moving away from that rigid frontline idea, is the formalization of strategic reserves.
Yes, strategic reserves are the ultimate expression of defensive depth. These are highly mobile, highly trained forces that you purposefully withhold from the initial battle line.
You keep them in your back pocket.
Exactly. They are trained and equipped for one specific purpose: counterattack or crisis response. They're meant for that critical moment when the enemy's initial momentum has stalled, they're tired, their supply lines are stretched, and you need a decisive, fresh force to hit them, regain the initiative, and push them back out of your territory. Their very existence signals a profound shift away from an all-or-nothing frontline defense.
So this whole era, from 71 to 88, it wasn't really about seeking some glorious, decisive, conventional victory. It was about pure national survival.
It was.
It was about building deep state resilience and making sure you could take that first hit without fracturing. The idea was to deter aggression just by being too tough of a nut to crack.
It secured the conventional front. It made the state much more resilient to a big frontal attack. But the lessons of the next era, which were born out of necessity on a completely different border, would pull the military in an entirely new and much more complicated direction.
A direction where they had to learn how to achieve their goals without using those big massed armies.
Precisely.
And that transition takes us straight into Section 3, the indelible lasting influence of asymmetric and proxy conflict, specifically the huge impact of the Afghan jihad. This is where the doctrine really learns to operate outside that conventional box.
This is where they learn to rely on intelligence over sheer firepower.
And this is arguably the most significant transformation in terms of its long-term strategic impact, isn't it? Because it introduces this whole concept of using non-state actors to achieve strategic goals.
It's a fundamental shift. The Afghan jihad exposed the military to a completely different scale and style of conflict, a conflict where it was Irregular forces, not state armies, who were achieving major political objectives against a superpower. That experience just fundamentally transformed Pakistani military thinking.
It proved, right there on their border, that you could achieve your political aims without mobilizing entire armies. You could do it with highly targeted, low-cost operations. So what were the practical skills, the new doctrines, that they picked up during this very complex, often clandestine period?
Well, first and foremost, it was the mastery of guerrilla warfare tactics. This meant they had to transition their thinking from large unit frontal assaults to small, irregular unit operations that relied on speed, surprise, and deep local knowledge.
Which is the polar opposite of the British model they had just perfected.
Completely counterintuitive, ideologically and operationally, to the big, structured formations they had just spent a decade solidifying. They had to learn how to operate unseen, often unsupported, for long periods of time.
And this experience, it cemented this reliance on non-state actors and on intelligence, which then gets formalized in their doctrine. That's what we now call LIC, or low-intensity conflict.
Exactly. They formally wrote doctrine around proxy and low-intensity conflict, and crucially, the focus shifted radically toward intelligence-led operations. Information, actionable data on enemy movements, anticipating supply needs, that became the primary weapon, not mass troops.
The insight there is just profound.
It is. The idea that knowing precisely where the enemy is going to be is strategically more valuable than having 10 more tank battalions to throw at a static point on a map.
That's a huge conceptual leap for any army, especially one steeped in that conventional British history.
And logistically, it was a whole new world. They developed an expertise that had absolutely nothing to do with the paved roads of the Punjab plains. The source specifically highlights the challenges of Mujahideen logistics and the incredibly complex, resource-intensive nature of mountain warfare.
Right.
Supplying an armored division on a highway is one thing. It's a known science. Supplying dozens of small, scattered, irregular units across remote, rugged terrain using mules and hidden supply caches. That is an entirely different and incredibly complex skill set.
A skill set that is invaluable for modern hybrid conflicts anywhere in the world.
Invaluable. And of course, the immediate practical need during that time was just securing a border that had suddenly become intensely volatile and porous.
They had to control the flow.
Precisely. The experience led them to focus specifically on sophisticated border interdiction tactics. How do you control a porous border? How do you monitor the movement of people and materials? How do you prevent infiltration or exfiltration, all without escalating the situation into a full-scale conventional war?
So you have to be tactically aggressive while remaining strategically restrained. It's a very fine line to walk.
A razor's edge.
So this whole section, it raises a really profound strategic question. How did the practical success of achieving major goals without conventional battles, through proxy and guerrilla tactics, how did that cement the idea of using these hybrid and asymmetric tools as a primary, viable instrument of state power in future conflicts?
It provided concrete empirical proof. They saw with their own eyes that these tools offer maximum leverage, especially against an adversary who has overwhelming conventional superiority. If you know you can't win the conventional fight, the smart strategic choice is not to play that game at all.
Find a different game to play.
Find a different game. The success in Afghanistan, at least from the viewpoint of their security establishment, created this foundational belief that hybridity and asymmetry weren't just tactics of last resort. They were an integrated primary instrument of state power. And that belief system, that new confidence, led directly into the next massive transformation, the one that put a ceiling on all future conflicts.
The nuclear age.
The nuclear age.
Which brings us to Section 4, strategic deterrence and the complete redefinition of strategy that came with nuclear weapons. This period runs from the late 1980s through the late 1990s, and it's where the introduction of nuclear weapons just fundamentally altered the entire calculus of war.
The doctrine moved from tactical adjustments to truly existential state policy.
This is the era where the entire military establishment, from the newest cadet to the chief of army staff, had to completely change their frame of reference.
It's a paradigm shift. The ultimate overarching goal became the establishment of what they call minimum credible deterrence, or MCD. This concept is the absolute cornerstone of their defense policy now.
So what does minimum credible deterrence actually mean?
It's defined as possessing just enough nuclear capability, and it has to be survivable and reliable to credibly threaten unacceptable retaliation against an aggressor. The goal is to ensure national survival without getting dragged into an expensive, open-ended arms race you can't win.
That word credible seems to be doing a lot of work there. It has to be survivable, meaning it can withstand a first strike, and the response has to be guaranteed and swift.
It's everything. If the other side doesn't believe you can and will use it, it's not a deterrent. And to make NCD operational, the doctrine mandated the adoption of a full-spectrum response strategy.
Okay, that sounds complex. Break that down for us.
It's a sophisticated, layered approach designed to counter threats at all levels. It defines clear escalation ladders. So they needed doctrine for subconventional threats like insurgency or terrorism. They needed doctrine for conventional threats like a large-scale military invasion. And they needed doctrine for strategic threats, the nuclear realm.
So it's a playbook for every scenario.
It's a playbook that dictates how to escalate or de-escalate appropriately across that entire spectrum of conflict, with the primary goal of ensuring the crisis is managed below the nuclear threshold.
And this shift required more than just theory. It needed tangible physical development. The doctrine had to mandate specific weapon systems to make that deterrence credible.
Absolutely. There was a massive emphasis on indigenous missile development. The source specifically cites the Gari and Shaheen series of missiles.
And why were they so important?
Because these systems provide the necessary mobile and survivable delivery platforms. That's the critical leg of MCD. They ensure that you have the ability to strike back from dispersed hidden locations, which massively enhances the arsenal's survivability against a preemptive strike. Without a reliable delivery system, the deterrence is just a bluff. It's moot.
And looking ahead, the long-term goals weren't just about deploying a few missiles. It was about achieving maximum stability and robustness for the future.
That's right. That included the stated ambition for a full nuclear triad, meaning having delivery capabilities via land-based missiles, from aircraft with gravity bombs, and potentially from sea-based platforms like submarines.
Which makes it almost impossible to destroy in a first strike.
Almost impossible. And critically, the doctrine focused heavily on establishing robust survivability models for the arsenal itself. We're talking deep underground bunkers, mobile launchers, extensive dispersal tactics, all designed to protect the nuclear assets to guarantee that the capability remains intact for retaliation. That's what stabilizes the deterrence.
So with this new nuclear reality, how did the primary goal of the conventional military change? I mean, the Army still exists, but its whole mission must have been redefined.
It was redefined dramatically. The doctrinal goal shifted from that old conventional focus of being able to fight and win a total war, which was now completely unthinkable because of the guaranteed risk of nuclear escalation.
Mutually assured destruction.
Exactly. The focus shifted to effectively handling limited conflict. The conventional military's new job was to manage smaller crises, to fight proxy wars, or to contain cross-border skirmishes below that nuclear threshold. The nuclear capability became the ultimate ceiling, but the conventional military needed to become incredibly adept at managing crises without ever crossing that red line. Restraint became the highest form of strategic skill.
And this is where the strategy becomes so incredibly nuanced and, frankly, volatile. For you, the listener, this doctrine essentially prevented a full-scale conventional war by creating that ceiling for escalation. But at the same time, it changed how every single conventional decision was made. Every troop movement, every border skirmish suddenly carried an existential risk.
It creates a state of perpetual strategic tension. It's often called a crisis stability paradox. The most important military skills are no longer just about battlefield command. They're about political judgment, restraint, and crisis management, all backed by this overwhelming destructive power.
That tension, that paradox, really sets the stage for the next critical phase, which trying to integrate all these competing lessons. The need for conventional strength, the proven success of asymmetric tools, and that looming shadow of the nuclear ceiling.
And that takes us to Section 5, the Musharraf era, where hybrid warfare and intense counterterrorism were formally fused into the doctrine.
Right. General Pervez Musharraf's era, starting around 1999, is where we see the military take all these different threads and try to weave them together. They start integrating counterinsurgency, or CI, and information warfare directly into their existing strategic structure.
And the first major change was a formal, explicit embrace of intense counterterrorism operations, or CT, as a primary military function. This was new. With the rise of non-state actors operating inside their borders and the global fallout from the war on terror, this internal security mission became a primary, permanent responsibility. It was no longer something you could just hand off to the police or intelligence agencies.
And this new internal focus, it must have demanded specific and very difficult new tactical skills, especially in terms of geography, because the fight was moving away from remote border areas and into the cities.
Absolutely. The doctrine had to rapidly confront the urbanization of war. Armies are historically trained to fight on open plains, in deserts, or in mountains, where cover and concealment are predictable. But now the fighting was increasingly happening in dense population centers.
In the cities themselves.
Yes. The necessity of developing specialized tactics for urban warfare became paramount. The source specifically cites the operations that were required in these incredibly complex environments, like Karachi and the Swat Valley.
Fighting house to house, dealing with IEDs, trying to maintain law and order while engaging an enemy who doesn't wear a uniform. It's a completely different beast.
It's close quarters combat, CQC, with extremely high risk of collateral damage, all intertwined with civilian life and infrastructure.
And that closeness to the civilian population, that must have demanded a huge conceptual shift in the doctrine.
It did. It demanded the formal inclusion of information and psychological operations, psyops, and a media strategy as a core component of any military action. In these urban conflicts, the narrative battle, who controls the story, who is seen as the protector versus the aggressor, is often more important than the physical battle for a street corner.
So it wasn't enough just to conduct the military operation. You had to explain it, justify it, and control the information environment around it. That became part of the doctrine itself.
Precisely. Controlling the information space stops public support from eroding, it limits the enemy's ability to recruit or spread disinformation, and it helps you manage the international perception of the operation. It is a fundamental acknowledgement that in modern warfare, information is a weapon. And alongside that conceptual shift, there was a major push for physical force enhancement to support these new, rapid, targeted operations.
What specifically did they enhance to enable this kind of fast-moving, intelligence-driven warfare?
This included the modernization and expansion of their air mobility capabilities. So think more helicopters, rapid deployment vehicles, things to move troops quickly into an operational area, whether it's a dense urban neighborhood or a remote mountain valley. Mobility was the key to keeping the initiative against an elusive enemy.
And there was a new focus on joint operations.
An intensive focus on joint operations doctrine, meaning getting the Army, Navy, and Air Force to coordinate seamlessly during complex CT missions rather than operating in their own separate silos.
And what about their special forces?
The Specialized Forces, the Special Services Group, or SSG, they saw a significant expansion and a real enhancement of their training and equipment. This was a clearer recognition that high-value, small unit operations, which require surgical precision and deep intelligence integration, were becoming the new norm, replacing those massive conventional deployments of the past.
So this era, it really represents the moment that their conventional strength truly fused with these fast, intelligence-driven asymmetric tactics. It was about applying massive force, but selectively, and backing it all up with a sophisticated media strategy to win hearts, minds, and the streets.
It created the foundational, comprehensive hybrid warfare model that they continue to refine to this day. But securing the land and the cities was only half the battle. As the physical battlefield was being secured, a new, completely different battlefield was rapidly emerging.
The digital space.
The digital space.
And that emergence brings us to Section 6, the digital battlefield and cyber frontiers, which covers roughly 2010 to 2025. This is the period of complete acknowledgement that the digital and electromagnetic spectrum is a primary, non-negotiable domain of conflict.
The doctrine formally enters the cyber era. It's a recognition that all modern national power, from your banking system to your communication infrastructure to your military command and control it, all relies on digital networks.
So the existential threat shifts from an armored column to a line of malicious code.
Exactly. The first major structural move was the development and centralization of a dedicated cyber command capability.
And this is far more than just a simple IT security team, right? This is a fully integrated strategic military unit.
Oh, absolutely. It is an offensive, defensive, and intelligence unit focused on the entire electromagnetic spectrum and the digital domain. Its mission includes protecting critical national infrastructure and, just as importantly, developing the capacity to disrupt an adversary's networks. And the technology involved here is incredibly dense. It covers everything from communication jamming to drone defense.
Which falls under electronic warfare, or EW. What specific doctrinal necessities drove that focus?
Well, there was a massive doctrinal focus on electronic jamming, the ability to disrupt and degrade enemy communications, their radar, their navigation systems, and crucially, the doctrine focused on developing sophisticated anti-drone systems, or CUAS.
Counter-unmanned aircraft systems.
Right. The global proliferation of cheap, easily accessible drone technology meant that the airspace, especially over border areas and conflict zones, had to be protected from these low-cost but high-impact asymmetrical threats.
I mean, a $500 drone from a hobby shop can carry a significant payload or gather actionable intelligence.
And it can render billions of dollars of traditional air defense systems potentially useless against it. So this is a recognition that the threat can come from above, cheaply, and without a formal military uniform.
And this is where the integration of data and artificial intelligence starts playing a really pivotal role, turning all that surveillance into a proactive defense.
Absolutely crucial. They began integrating AI-assisted surveillance and facial recognition technology into their security operations, both at the borders and in high-threat urban environments. At the same time, they established these large drone intelligence networks for persistent monitoring over wide geographical areas.
And then these networks are just feeding massive streams of data back to central command.
Terabytes of data. And that's the strategic advantage of integrating AI. The urgency comes from the sheer volume of information. No team of human analysts can process the data streaming in from hundreds of cameras and drones in real time.
It's just too much.
It's impossible. AI allows for the rapid analysis of these huge data sets, and it dramatically speeds up the identification of anomalies or potential threats. And that, in turn, drastically shortens the military's decision-making cycle, which is a core necessity in modern warfare.
And that data-driven approach, it wasn't just for border security. It became crucial for their internal conflicts and counterinsurgency efforts, tying back to the lessons of the previous era.
Yes, using data-driven methodologies for counterinsurgency became standard operating procedure, analyzing communication patterns, movement data, financial flows, logistical chains. It allows forces to predict and disrupt insurgent activity far more efficiently than just sending out large-scale patrols or conducting sweeps.
It moves counterinsurgency from being reactive to being highly proactive.
That's the goal. And finally, tying back again to the lessons of the Musharraf era, the idea of narrative control in this new digital space became institutionalized and dramatically expanded.
You mean the role of ISPR, the military's public relations wing?
Exactly. The prominence of ISPR-led narrative warfare is a defining feature of this doctrine. When the battlefield is digital and global, controlling the information space shaping perceptions both at home and internationally, countering disinformation in real time is recognized as an integral part of strategic defense. If you lose the information war, you can lose public support, even if you're winning the kinetic fight on the ground.
This is where it gets really transformative. As you said, the battlefield moved from mountains to motherboards. The old physical constraints of geography start to matter less than the security of your digital networks.
And that demands a whole new kind of soldier, specialized technological assets, and a constant talent pipeline. It means a threat can now originate from anywhere in the world and impact your critical national infrastructure instantaneously without a single soldier ever crossing a physical border.
So the military doctrine had to become globally aware and digitally focused, demanding just constant, enormous investment in maintaining technological superiority.
It's a race that never ends.
And that deep dive into digital integration, it transitions us perfectly into our final, most modern segment, the complete integrated framework under the current leadership, often referred to as the Meer Doctrine. This is the full synthesis of everything we've just discussed.
Digital, cyber, hybrid warfare. It's all in there. This is the current, comprehensive, all-encompassing strategic framework for what they themselves are calling next-generation warfare. And the most significant conceptual shift here is the elevation of cyber sovereignty to the same level as national defense.
Cyber sovereignty. So protecting your digital borders and securing the national information space is now officially considered as crucial, as resource-intensive, as defending your land borders.
It's a complete recognition that state integrity in the 21st century requires digital resilience as a foundational element, not as an afterthought.
And to handle the sheer speed of this new domain, they're accelerating their command and control decision-making by handing over a lot of the heavy analytical tasks to machines.
They're actively implementing AI-enabled battlefield command and control, or C2 systems. The speed of modern conflict, especially in the digital and electromagnetic spectrum, means human decision cycles are often just too slow to react to developing threats.
So AI helps bridge that gap.
AI assists by synthesizing these vast amounts of real-time data from drones, from electronic warfare systems, from satellites, and it provides commanders with near instantaneous optimized options for rapid decision-making.
That's a critical point. Commanders are getting options in seconds, not hours. But this reliance on tech, it extends deep into an area that has historically been plagued by inefficiency in armies everywhere, the supply chain.
And this is a remarkable and very specific doctrinal detail that really demonstrates the level of technological integration they're aiming for, using blockchain-secured logistics chains for supply management and integrity.
Blockchain, like with cryptocurrency.
The same underlying technology: supply chain leakage, corruption, inefficiency. These have been endemic problems in militaries worldwide for centuries. Blockchain provides an immutable, transparent, and distributed ledger for tracking sensitive equipment, spare parts, funds, anything of value.
So the key insight here is twofold. It guarantees your operational security by making sure supplies aren't intercepted or tampered with.
Right.
And it tackles systemic corruption within the supply chain by making every single transaction perfectly traceable and unchangeable.
Precisely. It's high-tech anti-corruption and operational security built into one system. It protects sensitive technology transfers and ensures that assets get to their intended units efficiently and without leakage. This is a foundational element for maintaining high operational readiness in the digital age.
And such a sophisticated, resource-intensive approach, it requires massive external support and collaboration. You can't just invent all this technology overnight in a lab.
No, you can't. So the doctrine necessitates and stresses formalized technological partnerships with key global players. It explicitly mandates technological alignment and cooperation with nations like China, strategic Gulf states, and often the U.S. on certain technologies.
So this is geopolitical statecraft directly driving their doctrinal capability.
It is. It's about ensuring they have access to the cutting-edge technology, AI, cyber tools, CUAS, that they can't indigenously develop fast enough to keep up with the threat curve.
And we also see the ultimate fusion of the digital and the physical in their infrastructure, creating a truly unified defense mechanism.
That's the deployment of what they call digital borders and smart surveillance towers. They're systematically linking their physical security fences, patrols, watchtowers with real-time data monitoring, facial recognition, thermal imaging, and persistent drone feeds.
So the physical border is now a data-gathering mechanism.
It's creating a constantly monitored digital ecosystem all along the physical border, and all that data is integrated via data link back to that central AI-enabled command structure.
But the most critical takeaway, the defining feature of this current doctrine, has to be the 360-degree hybrid warfare approach. It's the ultimate synthesis of everything.
This is where it all converges under a comprehensive whole-of-nation framework. The doctrine explicitly covers diplomatic, economic, cyber, and kinetic aspects of power. It's designed to ensure that all instruments of national power, the economic ministry, the diplomatic corps, the intelligence agencies, and the uniformed military, are all integrated into one cohesive, centralized defense strategy.
So security is no longer just the job of the armed forces.
Yeah.
It's defined as comprehensive statecraft.
That's the idea.
That sounds incredibly ambitious, though.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting they have a single unified strategy that can coordinate a trade minister's decision with an SSG operation and a cyber command deployment, all in real time? I mean, is that even feasible, given the complexities of bureaucracy and internal politics?
Well, it is certainly the stated goal of the doctrine. It's a recognition that in the modern era, military power is leveraged through economic resilience, diplomatic maneuvering, and informational dominance just as much as it is through tanks and jets.
Whether it's perfectly executed is another question.
Of course. But the logic of the doctrine reflects Pakistan's comprehensive entry into what they see as next-generation warfare. It's a focus not just on pure military strength, but on integrated, technology-driven national statecraft designed to maximize their deterrent effect against both conventional and asymmetrical threats.
This whole evolution, when you look at it through the lens of these 7 distinct eras, it is simply staggering. So let's zoom out and consider what this monumental transformation really means for you, the listener, trying to make sense of modern security dynamics.
The transformation is truly profound. I mean, you go from relying on early British-modeled armor and these rigid, static infantry formations in 1947 to now commanding AI-enabled command and control systems, sophisticated electronic warfare units, and vast drone intelligence networks.
The whole evolution just shows this constant, often forced, ability to adapt at incredible speed.
It does. An ability to adapt to severe geopolitical realities and rapid technological change. It demonstrates an almost desperate drive for strategic survival.
And for someone trying to grasp modern geopolitics or military strategy, why is this specific, rapid evolution so crucial to understand?
It's fundamental. Understanding modern military doctrine isn't just about reading a Wikipedia page on troop numbers or annual budget figures. It's about understanding a nation's strategic logic. It's about understanding its deepest insecurities and its technological investment priorities.
And the speed of that adaptation is the key.
The speed of adaptation, how quickly they shifted from conventional defense to asymmetric proxy conflict to nuclear deterrence, and finally to this full digital integration, that is the single greatest insight here. It shows a doctrine that is designed for fluid crisis management and what they perceive as a perpetual state of tension.
It's a roadmap of defensive innovation under constant, relentless pressure, one that required them to shed old legacy thinking at breakneck speed.
Absolutely. And if we look forward, if the future wars are indeed digital and require total cyber sovereignty, as this doctrine explicitly predicts, this raises a crucial, pressing question for national security everywhere.
Which is?
What happens when strategic defense has to be maintained not against conventional armies massed at a physical border, but against the constant, faceless, globally distributed threat of non-state cyber actors or even rogue AI systems?
That change in the threat profile, it just fundamentally changes everything. The nature of defense spending, surveillance, global partnerships, everything. And on a practical level, think about those specific technologies we just discussed. Blockchain-secured logistics and AI-enabled command systems. These systems are moving at the speed of light inside the security establishment. So what areas of civilian life and governance beyond the military will be the next to adopt this level of integrated, data-driven security, transparency, and control? Could we see blockchain securing election results? Or AI managing complex urban infrastructure like traffic or power grids?
The military is almost always the earliest adopter of these cutting-edge command and security systems, precisely because for them, the consequences are existential. But those doctrines, those technologies, they inevitably filter out into the civilian structure. They fundamentally reshape how we manage transparency, supply chain integrity, and high-speed decision-making across all of society. The defensive doctrine of today very often becomes the governance model of tomorrow.
A truly profound deep dive into how a nation's security thinking transforms when it's faced with just relentless, unending challenges. Thank you for helping us unpack these 7 incredible eras of doctrinal shift and for grounding the abstract, these specific, tangible realities.
My pleasure. It has been a complex, but I think a very necessary journey to understand.
We hope this dive has given you a clearer, more nuanced understanding of the forces shaping modern defense strategy. We'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.